Mount Fuji has been silent for more than 300 years. Last night, the ground beside it broke. A magnitude 5.6 earthquake, 12 kilometers down, shaking eastern Japan hard enough to throw objects off shelves at 10:30 at night. It sits at the most dangerous tectonic knot on Earth, where 3 plates collide and feed the volcano above. I will show you exactly what happened, why this spot terrifies scientists, and the one checklist that tells us whether this is normal or the start of something. Yesterday, central Japan was hit by 2 significant earthquakes inside a single calendar day, and the second one struck almost directly beside Mount Fuji. The first arrived in the early afternoon, shortly before 1 o'clock local time. The second came late that same night at 29 minutes past 10, when most people in the region were already home, already in bed, already asleep. Neither quake triggered a tsunami warning. Neither has been tied to any confirmed volcanic eruption. And on the raw numbers alone, neither was a monster. But the location of that second quake is the reason scientists across Japan spent the night staring at their instruments. And it is the reason we are talking about it right now. The second epicenter landed at the northern foot of one of the most closely watched volcanoes on the planet, inside what is arguably the single most complicated tectonic collision zone anywhere on Earth. That is the entire story, not the magnitude. The magnitude was ordinary for Japan. What was not ordinary was where the ground chose to break, and what is buried directly underneath it. So let me give you the facts first, cleanly, and then I will show you why this particular patch of ground makes seismologists nervous in a way that a far larger quake somewhere else simply would not. Let me start with the afternoon event, because it sets the stage, and then we will get to the one that actually matters. The first earthquake registered a magnitude of 5.8. Its epicenter was in northeastern Chiba Prefecture, east of Tokyo, on the Pacific side of Honshu. It originated about 50 kilometers down, roughly 31 miles below the surface, which is far lower in the crust than most of the shallow earthquakes the region has been producing lately. That detail matters, and I will come back to it because the difference in how far below the ground each of yesterday's quakes started is one of the quiet tells in this whole sequence. This was not a crack tearing open right beneath the streets of the capital. It was a rupture buried far down inside the stacked, layered plate system that sits under the Kanto region. But it was close enough to Tokyo that tens of millions of people felt it without any doubt at all. Buildings swayed, hanging objects swung. The shaking reached level 4 on Japan's seismic intensity scale, the Shindo scale. And I want to be clear about what that scale measures, because it is not the same thing as magnitude. Magnitude measures the energy released at the source of the quake. The Shindo scale measures how hard the ground actually shakes at a given place, from 0 up to 7. A level 4 is widely felt, enough to wake sleeping people and rattle dishes, but Japan, the best prepared earthquake nation on Earth, absorbed it without major damage. No tsunami warning was issued. By the standards of a country that lives with this every week, the afternoon quake was a strong jolt and not much more. Then, night fell, and the second quake hit. At 10:29 at night, the ground shook hard across eastern Yamanashi Prefecture and the Fuji Five Lakes region. The magnitude was 5.6 to 5.7, slightly smaller than the afternoon quake near Tokyo, and yet this was the alarming one. The reason is a combination of 3 things: how shallow it was, how hard it shook, and where exactly it landed. Start with how shallow it was. This quake originated only about 20 kilometers below the surface, roughly 12 miles, and an independent seismic record places it even closer to the surface, nearer 12 kilometers down. Compare that to the 50 kilometers of the Tokyo quake. When a rupture happens that close to the surface, the energy does not have far to travel before it reaches the towns and the people directly above it, so the shaking lands harder. And it did. The maximum recorded intensity reached level 6 on the Japanese scale in the area nearest the epicenter, with lower intensities radiating outward. Level 6 is not a rattle. Level 6 makes it difficult to stand. It moves heavy furniture across the floor, it throws unsecured objects off shelves, it cracks and damages weaker walls, and it arrived in the middle of the night, in the dark, with no warning, which is exactly the scenario that turns a survivable quake into a terrifying one. Now the part that actually matters. The epicenter sat near the Fuji Five Lakes area, at the northern base of the mountain. The independent record places it near a town called Oshino, in Yamanashi, at roughly 35.5 degrees north, and almost 139 degrees east. That is essentially the northern foot of Mount Fuji, inside the Fuji Five Lakes basin. The United States Geological Survey logged the same event under the broader heading of an eastern Honshu, Japan earthquake. And a separate, smaller magnitude 4.8 earthquake was recorded out in the Izu Islands region the following day, which tells you the broader area was lit up across several boundary zones at once. So here is the situation in one sentence. A shallow, hard-shaking earthquake struck in the dark last night, almost directly above the magma system that feeds Mount Fuji. Now you understand why nobody who watches this region treated it as routine. I need to be honest with you about something, because intellectual honesty is the only way this kind of story is worth telling. As of the latest reporting, there is no confirmed eruption of Mount Fuji. There is no tsunami warning. There is no official sign that magma is breaking through toward the surface. The quake beside Fuji is best described as a tectonic earthquake, the crust slipping along a stressed fault, inside a fiendishly complicated collision zone. It is not, as far as the data shows, a volcanic earthquake, and it is not a signal that an eruption is loading right now. No single-named surface fault has even been confirmed as the source in the first public records. So why does it matter? Why does a moderate quake here draw immediate global attention when a larger one somewhere else would barely make the news because of what is stacked underneath this exact spot? Most earthquakes happen along a single plate boundary, one fault, doing one thing. The ground beneath Mount Fuji is not like that. It is a place where multiple plate systems, multiple subduction zones, multiple fault networks, and a sleeping volcano's plumbing are all crowded into one small patch of the planet. When the ground moves at a junction like that, the question is never simply, how big was it? The question is, which of the many things tangled together down there just twitched, and does it matter to the others? That is a harder question, and it does not resolve cleanly in a single night. So let me take you down into that knot, because once you see it, you will never look at a quake near Fuji the same way again. Japan does not sit on a fault. Japan sits on a collision. The entire country is wedged and squeezed between several of the largest tectonic plates on the planet, and central Japan, where Fuji stands, is the single most tangled point of that squeeze. Come at it from the east first. Out in the Pacific, the enormous Pacific plate is being forced down and under the plate that Japan rides on, sinking along a feature called the Japan Trench. This is one of the most powerful and dangerous subduction zones in the world. It is the same system that produced the 2011 Tohoku earthquake, a magnitude 9.0, one of the largest ever recorded, the one that generated the catastrophic tsunami. That machine is still running right now off the northern and eastern coast, and it has been producing strong offshore earthquakes throughout this same period. Now come at it from the south. A different plate, the Philippine Sea Plate, is pushing up from below and sliding under central Japan along two more subduction systems, the Sagami Trough and the Nankai-Suruga Trough. Both of those are dangerous in their own right. The Nankai system in particular is the one Japanese authorities lose sleep over, because it has produced devastating megathrust earthquakes throughout history and is expected to again. And there is a third actor. Riding on top of that Philippine Sea Plate is a chain of volcanic islands called the Izu Bonin Arc, and that whole chain is being rammed into the underside of Honshu from the south. Geologists call this the Izu Collision Zone, an arc of volcanoes being crushed and jammed into the main island of Japan. It is a collision happening inside a collision. Now put it all together. The Pacific Plate sinking from the east, the Philippine Sea Plate sinking from the south, the Izu Arc smashing in from below, three major plate systems, multiple trenches, and a forest of active faults all converging on the same small region of central Japan. And Mount Fuji grew up directly on top of the point where they meet. That is why this is sometimes called the most dangerous tectonic knot on Earth. It is not marketing. It is a literal description of how many separate, powerful, hazardous systems are crammed into one place. This is why the Fuji region has so many earthquakes, so many active faults, so much volcanic activity, and such intense pressure, all stacked on top of each other. And this knot has a track record of lethality, which is the part that gives the geology its weight. The Sagami Trough, sitting just southeast of Fuji, is the same boundary that produced the Great Kanto earthquake of 1923, a magnitude near 7.9 that leveled much of Tokyo and Yokohama and killed well over 100,000 people, many of them in the firestorms that swept through the wooden city afterward. The Nankai system to the south has repeatedly generated megathrust earthquakes through recorded history and is widely expected to produce another large one this century. These are not theoretical hazards. They are events that have already happened here in this exact tangle of plates. And they are the reason Japanese authorities treat any unusual movement near this junction as something to examine rather than ignore. The knot is not just complicated, it is proven dangerous. Last night, that knot moved. Let me make the knot concrete, because three plates converging can sound abstract until you see the actual faults wrapped around the mountain. On the western side of Mount Fuji runs the Fujikawa-Kako fault zone, one of the active fault systems geologists watch carefully. To the southeast sits the Sagami Trough, the same boundary capable of producing the great earthquakes that have devastated the Tokyo region before. To the south and southwest lies the Nankai-Suruga system. And from the south, the Izu collision zone keeps pushing in. The mountain is essentially ringed by stress. Yesterday's quake beside Fuji appears to be a local rupture somewhere inside that overlapping web of pressure, the crust giving way under forces coming from several directions at once. And then there's the magma. The molten rock beneath Mount Fuji is not separate from all of this tectonic machinery. It is a direct product of it. The magma that built Fuji is fed by the same subducting plates that generate the region's earthquakes. The sinking Pacific Plate and the splitting, descending Philippine sea plate release fluids and heat as they go down. And that process is what melts rock and feeds the volcano above. In other words, the earthquakes and the volcano are not two unrelated hazards that happen to share an address. They are two outputs of the same underground engine. That is the crucial point, and it cuts both ways, as I will explain. It is exactly why a quake here cannot be waved away as meaningless background noise, and also exactly why a single moderate quake is not, by itself, proof that an eruption is coming. I'll hold both of those ideas at once because the honest answer lives in the tension between them. First, though, let me circle back to that afternoon quake near Tokyo, because it is not a separate story. It is the same knot showing its other face. Remember the magnitude 5.8 that hit Chiba in the afternoon, the one that started about 50 kilometers down? On its own, it looks like a separate event. Different place, different time, far below the surface instead of near it. But it is not separate. It is the same tangled plate stack expressing itself at a different level. Here's the difference and why it is revealing. The Tokyo quake started about 50 kilometers below the surface, which puts its origin down inside the subducting slabs themselves, the plates that have already plunged below Japan and are grinding along far underground. The Fuji quake started only about 12 to 20 kilometers down, which puts it up in the shallow crust, near the volcanic edifice. Same broad region, on the same day, but two completely different mechanical stories playing out at two different levels of the same stack. One was the lower machinery flexing, the other was the upper crust cracking near the volcano. Two windows into one knot. And this is the reason you keep hearing that Japan is on high alert. Not because of any one of these quakes by itself, but because of the pattern. Step back and look at the wider picture from the last couple of days. The day before yesterday, northern Japan was struck by a much larger earthquake near Iwate, revised by Japanese reporting to around magnitude 7.2, with violent shaking across that region. The Japan Trench offshore has been producing strong quakes through the same stretch. There is stress flexing far below the Kanto region around Tokyo. There is the shallow rupture beside Fuji, and there is that smaller quake out in the Izu Islands. Several independent fault systems, all energetic at once across just a few days. That is the kind of pattern that genuinely earns scientific attention. And I will be honest, it is also exactly the kind of pattern that fuels wild speculation online, which I will get to. But first, I want to deal with the question everyone actually asks when a quake hits near Fuji. The question that goes back more than 300 years. When people see a strong quake next to Mount Fuji, the fear that surfaces almost instantly is the memory of 1707. So let me tell you exactly what happened then, and exactly why it is both relevant and frequently misunderstood. Mount Fuji's last eruption is called the Hoei eruption, and it began in 1707. What makes it so unforgettable is the timing of what came before it. Just 49 days earlier, Japan was struck by the Great Hoei earthquake, one of the largest earthquakes in the country's recorded history, a megathrust event on the Nankai-Suruga system, somewhere in the high magnitude 8 range. 49 days after that colossal quake, the mountain that had been quiet roared back to life. The eruption sent ash drifting all the way toward Edo, the city we now call Tokyo, coating it in volcanic grit for weeks and ruining farmland across the region. And it is worth pausing on what that would mean today, because the city downwind is no longer a cluster of wooden houses. It is one of the largest metropolitan areas on the planet, home to tens of millions of people, and the dense machinery of a modern economy. Even a modest ashfall over Greater Tokyo would ground flights, foul water supplies, short-out electronics, and snarl transport for a region that runs on precision timing. That is not a forecast of what is coming. It is simply the reason the stakes attached to this one mountain are so much higher now than they were 3 centuries ago. And since that 1707 eruption ended, Mount Fuji has been silent. More than 300 years of silence. That is the warning the mountain has not given in 3 centuries. The reminder that this volcano can pair with a great earthquake, and that it is overdue for nothing in particular, but capable of a great deal. So when the ground breaks near Fuji, That history is what flashes through people's minds, and the reflex of concern is completely understandable. But here is where I have to be precise with you, because the difference between the two events is enormous, and it changes everything. The earthquake that preceded Fuji's eruption in 1707 was a megathrust monster in the high magnitude 8 range. Yesterday's quake beside Fuji was a magnitude 5.6. Those are not neighbors on the scale. The magnitude scale is not linear. Each step up represents a massive jump in energy. An event in the high magnitude 8 range releases on the order of 1,000 times the energy of a magnitude 5.6, and when you measure it by total seismic moment, the gap is larger still. The quake that helped wake Fuji 3 centuries ago was in a completely different class of violence than what we saw last night. A magnitude 5.6 is simply not the kind of event that, by itself, has ever been understood to trigger an eruption. The 1707 pairing is the reason we watch. It is not a forecast that what happened then is happening now. Let me deal directly with the science of whether one earthquake can set off a volcano, because this is where careful thinking matters most, and where the internet tends to go off the rails. It is true, and well established, that large earthquakes redistribute stress. When a big fault ruptures, it loads stress onto neighboring faults, sometimes nudging them closer to their own failure, sometimes relieving them. Scientists call this static and dynamic stress transfer, and it is real. The legitimate question they monitor is whether a sequence of regional tectonic stress changes can, over time, alter the state of stress around a volcano's plumbing. That is a real area of study. But notice the framing. It is monitored, not predicted, and it concerns large quakes and long timescales, not a single moderate jolt flipping a switch overnight. A magnitude 5.6 is far too small to itself trigger an eruption. What a quake like this actually does is something more subtle. Because Fuji's magma system is physically coupled to the very same plates that generate these earthquakes, a quake here is not meaningless. It is a data point worth logging, a reason to keep the instruments pointed at the mountain. But it is also not, on its own, evidence that an eruption is loading. The honest scientific position sits in the uncomfortable middle, the place that does not make a satisfying headline. Worth watching. Not worth panicking over. Both halves of that sentence are true at the same time, and anyone who tells you only one half is selling you something. This is the exact gap where the conspiracy theories rush in, and predictably, they already have. So let me state them plainly and then show you what the data actually supports, because you deserve the real answer, not a dismissal and not a scare. The first claim is that this was some kind of engineered or weapon-induced quake. The idea that a quake clustering near a famous landmark must be artificial. There is no mechanism by which any known technology produces a magnitude 5.6 earthquake, 12 to 20 kilometers below the surface inside a subduction collision zone. The energy involved is astronomical, and the event is fully explained by 3 plates grinding together. Multiple independent seismic agencies, Japanese and international, all logged it as a natural tectonic earthquake. The second claim is that authorities are secretly hiding an imminent Fuji eruption. The trouble with that one is that the signals which would precede an eruption are openly published and tracked, and as of now, they are not flashing. So the theory has to recast the absence of warning signs as proof of a cover-up, which is not how evidence works. The third claim is that a solar storm caused the quakes, and I will be genuinely fair here, because the timing did line up. The period featured elevated solar activity and a large developing sunspot region. But there is no established mechanism linking geomagnetic activity to crustal rupture at these scales. The regional plate stresses are independently more than enough to explain everything we saw. The solar timing is a coincidence, exactly the kind of coincidence that fuels the theory, and exactly why it has to be examined honestly and then set aside on the evidence. And the fourth claim, that magma is rising right now, runs into the same wall. A shallow tectonic quake near a volcano is a reason to monitor, not a confirmation of magma climbing toward the surface. No low-frequency volcanic quakes, no ground swelling, no gas anomalies have been reported. So if the conspiracy answers are out, what is the real thing to watch? That is the right question, and it has a concrete answer. There is an actual checklist that volcanologists and seismologists run through to tell the difference between a benign tectonic aftershock sequence and the early signs of genuine volcanic unrest. You can follow it yourself over the coming days, because the data is public and it will tell you far more than any dramatic claim. The first thing they watch is the aftershocks. Do they die out quickly and quietly, the way a normal tectonic sequence fades? That is the reassuring outcome, and it is the most likely one. The second thing is migration. Is the seismic activity staying put where it started, or is it creeping closer to the summit of Fuji over time? Movement toward the volcano would be a concern. The third is the type of quake. Are these ordinary tectonic ruptures, or are low-frequency volcanic earthquakes, the distinctive, softer signals associated with moving fluid and magma, starting to appear? The fourth is deformation. Is the ground around the mountain physically swelling or tilting the way it does when magma pushes up from below? Satellites and ground sensors track this continuously. The fifth is gas. Are volcanic gas emissions changing in volume or chemistry? And the sixth is the official one. Does the Japan Meteorological Agency raise the volcanic alert level for Mount Fuji? Here's the current status of that checklist. And it is the most important paragraph in this whole story. As of now, none of those escalation signals are being reported. Not the migration toward the summit, not the low-frequency volcanic quakes, not the ground swelling, not the gas changes, not an alert level increase. Every one of those boxes is, for the moment, unchecked. The situation reads as tectonic, not magmatic. The mountain shook because the crust around it broke under tremendous pressure, not, as far as anyone can presently measure, because something is waking up inside it. So where does that leave us this morning? Let me bring it back to the spine of the story, because the central question is genuinely unresolved, and that is the honest place to end. When the ground moves at the exact junction where subduction, collision, crustal faulting, and a sleeping volcano's magma all converge, how do you tell the difference between the planet simply being itself and the first quiet sign of something stirring? Most of the time, the answer is the former. Japan sits on a stack of grinding plates, and a moderate earthquake at the Fuji knot is, statistically, just that stack being what it has always been. The overwhelming likelihood is that the aftershocks fade, the instruments stay calm, and in a week this is a footnote. But the reason it is worth your attention is that this is one of the few places on Earth where you cannot fully separate the earthquake from the volcano, because they are fed by the same machine far below. So the watching matters. Over the next few days, the things to track are simple and public. Whether the aftershocks near Fuji settle down or persist, whether any of the volcanic warning signs appear, and whether the Japan Meteorological Agency changes its assessment. Keep an eye, too, on the broader picture. The Japan Trench offshore, the lingering energy from the larger quake up near Iwate, the general restlessness across central Japan, because the story here was never really one quake. It was a system reminding everyone how much pressure it holds. For now, the responsible raid is the one the data supports. Mount Fuji has been silent for more than 300 years. Last night, the ground beside it broke hard enough to make people across an entire region grab for something solid. That is not an eruption, and it is not a prediction of one. It is the most dangerous tectonic knot on Earth doing what it does, and a reminder that on this particular patch of ground, the planet is never fully at rest. We will be tracking the instruments around Fuji closely, and the moment any of those warning signs actually change, you will know.